Everyone was puzzled by what Emoku was doing. He walked up and took a look at the sacred remains in the divine casket. Everyone was puzzled by what Emoku was doing. He walked up and took a look at the sacred remains in the divine casket. Emoku growled after taking a single look. His body was sent reeling, and blood dripped from his eyes again. The scene was harrowing. The hell? Everyone around looked at Futian, who was standing in front. We'd get used to it after taking several looks? How are we supposed to keep looking like that? They wondered. Emoku had only taken a look on his second try, and his eyes were still filled with blood. How are we supposed to keep looking? We will probably go blind if we look one more time, let alone several. This is terrible, they thought. It was then that all of them realized that Futian was toying with Emoku. There was no way one could get used to it just by looking more. Yet Emoku actually believed those ridiculous claims of his. Futian had tried this personally, taking repeated looks at the sacred remains. It was indeed as he had put it. He eventually got used to it. Emoku would not have been duped otherwise. Emoku opened his eyes moments later, and the look in his eyes was filled with cold, killing intent. He saw how effortless and graceful Blind Tai and Futian had behaved before. Yet, being repeatedly fooled by Futian in front of everyone was something that someone of his status could hardly stomach. It was true embarrassment. One could easily imagine his mood at that moment. Formless power emanated from Emoku. Someone was seen shooting into the sky. It was none other than Blind Tai. Blind Tai had also decided to release a powerful aura, which shrouded over Emoku. Seemingly, he was trying to remind Emoku to remember his place. Emoku sensed that aura and shot a look at Blind Tai, yet his eyes were still filled with killing intent. There was still blood beneath his eyes, making him look rather eerie. There are things that one is not worthy of looking at, and there is nothing that one can do to change it. It's not like all those years ago, where one could take whatever one wished, Blind Tai said, jabbing at Emoku being unworthy of looking at the sacred remains. You never changed, did you? Still as blunt with your words as ever. Emoku said plainly, if I were unworthy of looking at the divine casket, isn't that the same as saying that no cultivator in the Shangqing domain would be worthy of doing so? While my words do not sound pleasant, it is the truth. It is what it is, and I myself am not worthy of doing so either. Is there any reason for me to sugarcoat it? Blind Tai replied. He had, of course, gotten to know Emoku better after what had happened all those years ago. That the man he once called a brother was someone who would get what he wanted by any means necessary. What he said earlier was deliberately worded to provoke him, but given that his conscience was clear, he didn't mind at all. While what Blind Tai said didn't sound nice, everyone who was present was a cultivator at the Runhuang Plain, and some were indeed very, very powerful. As such, they knew that Blind Tai was telling the truth. These were not just any sacred remains, but the remains of Xinjia the Great Emperor, a great emperor and a god of ancient times. If they were not allowed to look at it, that would only mean that they were indeed not worthy. There was nothing to be ashamed about. Emoku moved his sight away from Blind Tai and turned to Futian. He walked up to Futian after seeing the other man was about to retreat, shrouding massive pressure over Futian, placing a lockdown on the space Futian occupied. He coldly said, if you're already used to it, why not take a few more glances instead of retreating? The divine light around Futian was terrifying enough that Emoku closed his eyes all of a sudden, about to retreat, yet he was prevented from doing so by the powers of the Great Path. Boom! He emitted a huge pressure, which he then withdrew. Blind Tai attacked after sensing what was happening. He brought down a divine hammer from above, viciously aiming at Emoku. Emoku raised his hand and grabbed outward. A massive hand took hold of the specter of that divine hammer, and the mighty pressure of the Great Path swept all over the place, causing a harrowing storm below as it traveled downwards, causing many to reel from the shock right away. What are you two doing outside the domain chief's manor? A voice came from the domain chief's manor. The voice was heard before the man was seen. A group of people then walked out of the domain chief's manor and emerged in the air, looking at Emoku and Blind Tai fighting each other. Emoku pulled his hand back, and Blind Tai stopped attacking as well. Futian retreated and glanced at Emoku. There were young men and women, as well as powerful elders that had just emerged. They concealed their powers. Also, they needed to stand in midair in order to cast a faint pressure over everyone. The leader was a middle-aged man, who was the son of the domain chief's manor of Shangqing Domain, Zhou Muhuang. He could also be called the young master of the domain chief's manor. His powers were towering, and he was already one of the most powerful cultivators to be found in the Shangqing Domain. He was at level 9 of the Great Path. Even the titans among the top-notch cultivation forces wouldn't have many among them capable of winning against Zhou Muhuang. The father and son of the Shangqing Domain were both standing at the very pinnacle. Of course, given that even Zhou Muhuang himself had trained for over 100 years, the chief was definitely much older. He was someone of supreme power among those of the previous generation. However, due to Zhou Muhuang having unparalleled training, he appeared rather young, around 40. In the Shangqing Domain, few dared to be disrespectful to that young master. This was due to his status, and because his powers were more than enough to put a great many powerful fighters in the domain in their place. "Greetings, young master," many greeted. Those with weaker powers had even bowed to Zhou Muhuang. The man stood where he was and scanned the crowd before saying, "At ease, everyone. This divine casket was brought here from the Tsongyuan continent. It is unimaginably mystical yet very dangerous. That was why my father forbade anyone from looking at it. But if any of you would like to take a look, the domain chief's manor won't stop you. However, the consequences are all yours. You all are the best that the Shangqing Domain has to offer. Anybody who would like to learn about the divine casket is welcome to do so. There is simply no need for fights," Zhou Muhuang elaborated. Although both Emoku and Blind Tai were powerful cultivators and of advanced age themselves, if one were to really go about counting, they would probably be deemed juniors to Zhou Muhuang, especially in the case of Blind Tai. Blind Tai was probably the youngest, and was probably far younger than Zhou Muhuang. As such, it was only natural for Zhou Muhuang's words to carry immense weight. "Forgive us for our impulsiveness, Muhuang," Emoka cupped his hands and said. Despite his status, he still had nothing to brag about before Zhou Muhuang. "Right," Zhou Muhuang nodded. "My father invited cultivators from all over, and we would not wish to see any altercations break out. Should there be any personal feud among you, I'd advise you to try not to act on them here. With you being the one giving the word, I shall do as you say, Muhuang," Emoku replied, and Blind Tai nodded. Zhou Muhuang nodded and turned his eyes back to Yi Futian. "Your reputation precedes you, Emperor Yi. You're indeed as dashing as you are reputed to be." Everyone was stunned. Zhou Muhuang was of such prestigious standing that he could afford to ignore Emoku and Blind Tai. He did not need to be courteous, even to the many titans from the many cultivation forces out there. Yet he seemed to have taken a liking to Yi Futian very much, complimenting the man as he did. Zhou Muhuang, a young master of the domain chief's manor of Shangqing Domain. Level 9 Perfection in Great Path. Yi Futian looked at the middle-aged man and recalled Duan Qiong's introduction. According to Duan Qiong, not even her father, Duan Tianxiong, would beat Zhou Muhuang. Furthermore, one could tell just how ambitious he was from his name alone. Zhou Muhuang. Just how many expectations had his father piled on his son? Was he hoping for his son to become the great emperor then? Yi Futian had been in 2 domains before, the Donghua Domain and the Shangqing Domain. The ones from the domain chief's manor were all mighty. There were Ning Yuan and Ning Hua from Donghua Domain, and both were mighty beings. The way Yi Futian saw it, those of the domain chief's manor, who ruled over the 18 domains in Donghuang the Great's stead, were all supreme beings in their own right. All of them were titans, and the powers of such people were every bit on par with those who served the great imperial palace directly. Said titans could actually be more powerful instead. It would seem that the establishment of the domain chief's manor reigning over the 18 domains was anything but simple. The years in which Donghuang the Great ruled over the divine prefectures were not all that long. The nobles of the divine prefectures carved up their own territories, and powerful beings were aplenty. Donghuang the Great would naturally need to enlist the help of those who were of supreme powers, to begin with, if he were to rule over the divine prefectures. That was probably how the domain chief's manors of the 18 domains came about. They weren't necessarily considered closed ones of Dong Huang the Great. You speak too highly of me, senior. Yi Futian bowed slightly. Despite being the young master, he was nonetheless Yi Futian's senior, so there was nothing wrong for him to address him as such. I know a thing or two about your exploits. You hail from Donghua Domain, then went to Four Corner Village. You've gotten acquainted with the ancient royal family of Duan. You are nothing less than extraordinary. It is a pity that Ning Yuan of the Donghua Domain's domain chief's manor overlooked your brilliance, wanting to actually kill someone of your caliber. I wonder what was he thinking? Zhou Muhuang then said to Yi Futian, Yi Futian, if you intend to train in the domain chief's manor of Shangqing Manor, you'd be welcome to do so, by both my father and me. Everyone was stunned upon hearing what Zhou Muhuang just said. The first thing he did after coming outside was try to get Yi Futian to his side. He had actually invited him to train in the domain chief's manor. One could tell that he was incredibly impressed with Yi Futian and wanted to capitalize on this opportunity. Furthermore, he was totally unfazed by the powers at Donghua Domain and voiced Ning Yuan's mistakes just like that. One could tell that the domain chief's manors were hardly acquainted with each other and left each to their own devices. So long as Yi Futian was willing to agree to join the domain chief's manor, he would definitely be able to rise to greater heights in terms of status. By then, not even those from the Donghua Domain could easily do anything against him. Yi Futian was rather surprised by the treatment. This treatment was rather ironic given that he had intended to train in the domain chief's manor back at the Donghua Domain. Instead, it was he had been set up and hunted instead. When he had lost all such intentions, those of the domain chief's manor of the Shangqing Domain extended their invitation instead. However, he was no longer in a state suitable for doing so. He had joined Four Corner Village prior, and was already one of them. He was not about to abandon the village for the domain chief's manor. I'm sorry, senior. I've joined Four Corner Village, and it would be unsuitable for me to train in the domain chief's manor. I'm afraid that I have no choice but to pass up the offer. Truly, I beg for your forgiveness, Yi Futian replied. Blind Tai, Fang Huan, and the others nodded in silence. Those from the village had indeed been right about Yi Futian. He would have received more benefits, and great ones at that, if he were to choose the domain chief's manor over the village. However, given that he had become one of the cultivators of the Four Corner Village, and the village had decided to train openly in the world, that itself would then make the village one of the titans in the Shangqing Domain. Given the circumstances, he couldn't join either without renouncing membership of the other. If the village were to remain closed to the world, it wouldn't have been a problem. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Zhou Muhuang heard what Yi Futian said and nodded. I understand. Zhou Muhuang heard what Yi Futian said and nodded. I understand. The way the others behind Yi Futian looked at him suggested that they were having other thoughts. It was indeed quite a pity for Yi Futian to pass up such an opportunity, as Yi Futian was someone with such superb talent that it was incredibly possible for him to become a titan on his own. However, he would most definitely achieve success a lot more quickly if he were to train in the domain chief's manor. Most importantly, Yi Futian had a lot of enemies. The way they saw it, there were just too many superb geniuses perishing on their way to greatness. If Yi Futian were able to train in the domain chief's manor, and as such, gain the domain chief of the Shangqing Domain's protection, he would have been at considerably lower risk. Yet he chose to remain with the Four Corner Village instead. Zhou Muhuang looked up at the crowd and said, a lot of all of you present today are the best that the Shangqing Domain has to offer. It would be impossible for you not to look at the divine casket. Anyone who wishes to take a look, please do not get in the way of the others. Whether or not any of you can gain something from it, or not, is entirely up to you. Everyone nodded. There was nothing else the others could say, given that Zhou Muhuang had spoken. Zhou Muhuang was then seen walking up to the divine casket at that moment, taking a look inside. Massive fluctuations of the great path rumbled around him from him taking just a single look. Yet, that pair of frightening eyes continued to look into the divine casket. It took him quite a while to close his eyes and back away. All who saw what happened were in awe, deeming that he had indeed lived up to his prestige of being among the strongest. While Zhou Muhuang's training was only one level higher than Muyin Lan and Emoku, the difference of just one level was, in itself, a chasm. No matter how superb said people were, they could still never win, even if they were to join hands in the face of Zhou Muhuang. So this is what those at great emperor level are like. Zhou Muhuang mumbled to himself. His aura was flighty, making him feel like someone who was above mortals. He could tell that those ancient symbols seemed like that they were beyond what people knew to be the Great Path. It could even be said that those were in the path that great Emperor Xinjia himself created. With those symbols carved within his body, that body itself had become a manifestation of the path. Someone was walking to Zhou Muhuang's side at that moment. That woman had a superb appearance, and her bearing was extremely elegant. It felt like she was a goddess that had descended to the mortal realm. The woman was none other than Zhou Muhuang's sister Zhou Lingxi. Zhou Lingxi took a look at her brother, who then told her, "Be very careful if you're about to look. The level great Emperor Xinjia reached all those years ago is already somewhere we mere mortals cannot comprehend. All powers that we're versed in are utterly useless before him. Be prepared if you really want to take a look." "I want to take a look," Zhou Lingxi answered. Insistence was seen in her eyes. She deemed herself capable of bearing whatever cost it could have incurred, and she would never rest until she got to look at the sacred remains with her own eyes. "All right then." Zhou Muhuang nodded and didn't stop Zhou Lingxi. Zhou Lingxi went up, and she shrouded herself with divine light, which made her look even more spiritual and mystical. That princess from the domain chief's manor was, too, a supreme genius. She had superb cultivation talents, and was at perfection at level 6. One more step, and she could already make a step into high-level Renhuang. One could imagine just how terrifying the powers the domain chief's manor would command by then. Other than the domain chief himself, it was obvious that even his children were people who were a cut above the rest. Zhou Lingxi went up to the divine casket and took a look inside. There was no miracle happening. Despite being a princess of the domain chief's manor, her eyes were bloodied, and her aura wavered from a single look. She was sent reeling back as blood poured all over her face. She covered her face with her hands and looked in very, very bad shape. Many felt pity that a female Renhuang was in such a pitiful state. Zhou Muhuang came to his side without saying anything. Zhou Lingxi took a while before her state gradually steadied. She moved her hands away, and her eyes remained bloodshot even then. This gave her a tinge of withering beauty. She looked like she was some beautiful woman who was about to pass away. "Are you all right?" Zhou Muhuang asked. "I'm fine." Zhou Lingxi shook her head slightly. Slivers of watery mist appeared, and she wiped the blood off of her face. Her eyes remained slightly bloodshot still, making it obvious that that one look before had greatly damaged her eyes. She was only at level 6 after all. This put her beneath the likes of Muyin Lan and Emoku. Many murmured among themselves, looking like they were seriously discussing something. Many cast impressed looks at Futian. They could tell from what happened with Zhou Lingxi, when she looked at the divine casket, how rare someone like Futian actually was. When he was being compared to Muyin Lan and Emoku, he had been able to do better than they had. Zhou Lingxi, too, was at a level higher than Futian, and everyone was able to see what happened to her. Zhou Lingxi turned her eyes around to look at Futian. She walked up gracefully to him, which caused him to wear a puzzled expression. Zhou Lingxi then came to Futian's side, and she actually bowed to him. He raised his eyebrows slightly and asked, "What warranted that, Princess Lingxi?" "I'd like to ask you something, Sir Yi," Zhou Lingxi said. Futian then replied, "Please, Princess Lingxi, just tell me what you would like to know." I was unable to take the strain after just taking one look inside the divine casket, which enabled me to learn what was so extraordinary about you, Sir Yi. However, I was more or less able to tell what was inside the divine casket. I'd like to know how you prevented yourself from being injured by the sacred remains inside. Zhou Lingxi asked, and many were wearing curious looks, as she was not the only one who wanted to know. Everyone around was curious as well. Emoku had, too, asked before, but Futian never wanted to say anything. However, Given that it was the princess of the domain chief's manor asking for his advice, after taking such damage, Yi Futian simply couldn't refuse. Yi Futian looked at the princess, and he indeed was finding it difficult to refuse to answer. However, the sacred remains which he was able to gaze on were more complex, as far as the secrets of the world tree were concerned, which meant that he could never tell her the whole truth. He had even wondered if the princess was actually asking for his guidance, or if she was just testing him. It seemed that, eventually, it would be more likely that the former was true, given that she had looked in the coffin herself, and had been severely damaged because of that. Furthermore, be it the domain chief's manor itself, or the Zhou siblings, they had all been very courteous with him. If it is something that you find inconvenient to voice, Sir Yi, then please forgive my rudeness. Zhou Lingxi looked at Yi Futian before bowing again. It's not actually all that inconvenient. It was just that the very reason why I could gaze upon the remains is due to something particular about my training. Furthermore, I experienced some surreal encounters back in the Donghua domain that allows me to resist such effects to a degree. However, they will not do you much good, princess, Yi Futian answered. I see. Zhou Lingxi nodded. It seems that I don't have the opportunity to learn by looking at the sacred remains then. Given that you have such an ability, Sir Yi, are you able to sense the will of the ancient gods from the sacred remains? Although Yi Futian was responding to Zhou Lingxi, this was only polite small talk. In reality, no one knew what he was actually doing. They could only guess. Perhaps it was because he had received the gift from the demon monarch in the Donghua domain back, that he could block the great emperor's divine armor will. Although Yi Futian was responding to Zhou Lingxi, this was only polite small talk. In reality, no one knew what he was actually doing. They could only guess. Perhaps it was because he had received the gift from the demon monarch in the Donghua domain back, that he could block the great emperor's divine armor will. This is a rare opportunity indeed. If you come to some understanding, Emperor Yi, I would hate to miss out on it, said Emperor Zhoumu with a smile. I understand, said Yi Futian with a nod. I will work hard and see if I can glean some ancient cultivation arts from the divine body. However, if I only get to look at it for a little bit, then that will be too short a time to learn much. The divine body is full of wonder, but it will be hard to get much out of it. The body of Xinjia the Great Emperor is indeed wonderful. We will see it together. If you have any doubts, Emperor Yi, you can find me in the domain chief's manor at any time, and we can discuss your feelings, said Emperor Zhoumu. Thank you, elder, said Yi Futian with a slight nod. Zhoumu said no more to him. He turned to the crowd around them and said, if any of you want to come, you must take caution that you do not make any mistakes. If you do not have enough control, you should not try. Of course, if you think you do have enough control, you can come with Emperor Yi and try to seize this opportunity. Everyone nodded. Given Emperor Zhoumu's lofty position, he naturally had the right to lecture them like this. On saying this, Emperor Zhoumu turned and left, leading them towards the domain chief's manor. He turned his head and saw Zhou Lingxi still standing there. Lingxi, are you staying here, or are you returning to the manor? He asked. I will stay here and watch. You go on ahead, said Zhou Lingxi. All right. Emperor Zhoumu nodded and did not linger any longer. Zhou Lingxi stood not far from Yi Futian, smiling at him and saying, I expect that you will be able to gain an understanding of the imperial will from the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor, Mr. Yi. You are too kind, Princess Lingxi, said Yi Futian with a smile and a nod. Among the crowd, Chen Yi and some of the others felt that this scene before them was quite strange. This Zhou Lingxi seemed quite close to Yi Futian. It is still essential to keep up appearances, murmured Chen Yi. Even in the Runhuang Plain, appearances still mattered. You don't understand, whispered Condor Sama, looking at Chen Yi with a bit of contempt. It was not surprising that Chen Yi had not understood. I don't understand, sneered Chen Yi. What don't I understand? The boss has walked all this way on his own, under his own halo. How could you understand it? Said Condor Sama. What? Chen Yi looked at the condor, as if it were an idiot. Even demons can flatter so shamelessly? Spring insects know nothing of ice. How can common people understand the world of masters? Said Condor-sama enigmatically. Chunyi wanted to hit it, but there was no need for him to do it. The black-winged condor felt a cold will. It turned around and saw Xia Qingyuan looking at it coldly. It shrank back. She was murderous. At that moment a soft, clear voice rang out. Of all the heroes, Emperor Yi is the only one who can observe the divine body. In that case, is he the most powerful of all the proud heroes of the Shangning domain? The clouds in the sky shifted as a group of figures descended. Many veiled women were pulling a carriage behind them. The chariot was very spacious, and behind a thin veil, there seemed to be a charming figure reclining, seeming almost insubstantial. Even looking through the thin curtain, she seemed to be exquisitely beautiful. The black-winged condor looked up and whispered, "Do you understand?" Condor-sama's expression was profound and mysterious. It was like he was in a divine trance. Chunyi's mouth twitched. He seemed to understand a bit now. Everyone's eyes were upon the carriage. If empresses were pulling the carriage, what kind of person could be inside? It's someone from the palace of the illusory god, someone whispered. It's her. The cultivators from the top powers narrowed their eyes. They already knew who was coming. This woman was an incredibly famous figure in the world of cultivators. And she was a bit eccentric. She had been born in the palace of the illusory god, but it was said that she had been kicked out when she was young due to an inter-family conflict. She had lived a hard life and experienced much suffering. However, she had managed to slay all the members of the family, who had hurt her own family all by herself. This had caused a great stir when it happened, and many people had heard of it. But in the end, the palace of the illusory god had accepted her once again. This woman was called the goddess Qihuan by the world of cultivators. She had already cultivated up to the 9th tier, and although her great path was not perfect, her illusions were powerful. She could entice people towards any earthly desire, and make them fall into a deep trance, from which they could not pull themselves out of. Thus, she was called Goddess Qihuan. When she had dealt with her family's enemies, she had hurt them so badly that they no longer wished to live. Careful, that is the Goddess Qihuan of the 9th tier. Her illusions are frighteningly powerful, and she is a tricky swordswoman. She is an eccentric of the palace of the illusory god, said Duan Xiong to Yi Futian telepathically. The palace of the illusory god and the ancient royal family of Duan were both great powers of the middle third heavens, and had come into conflict many times. Thus he understood them very well. He naturally knew of the goddess Qihuan. Yi Futian was a bit uncomfortable when he heard this. This goddess Qihuan seemed to be praising him, but her words had pushed him to the forefront of this storm. What he had done before had attracted a lot of attention. Now goddess Qihuan had said that he was the most powerful of all the proud heroes of the Shangqing domain. A title like that was absolutely not a good thing. You honor me too much, senior. The reason I can observe the divine body is due to the specialty of my cultivation. I would not dare call myself the most powerful. There are many other Renhuangs who are much stronger than me. Yi Futian called up into the sky. Although he knew her name, he did not call her goddess, opting for senior instead. Laughter like that of a silver bell rang out. The woman descended into the air above Yi Futian, the curtain before her blowing in the wind. Everyone could faintly see a stunning figure lying within. Her eyes seemed able to enchant people's very souls. She smiled at Yi Futian. Just an ordinary glance from her seemed able to send one into a trance. She made it so that she was the only thing that Yi Futian could see. His consciousness was drawn into the carriage where he beheld her perfect, flawless form. This woman was no less beautiful than Zhou Lingxi, and she had a more concrete sense of charm about her. Her killing power was greater as well. Everyone appreciates beauty, and cultivators were no different. But they were able to control their appreciation of beauty, and would not let their minds to affect it. This was especially true for Renhuan-level cultivators. They would certainly not sink to that level. Thus, her beauty was not that enticing for Yi Futian. It hurts me to hear you call me that, Emperor Yi, said the goddess Qihuan softly. Even her voice seemed to have a mysterious charm to it that would make people fall into reveries. You are much older than me, senior, and you have cultivated to a much higher level. That is why I call you senior, to show you respect. Why would you say that I am hurting you? said Yi Futian casually, looking up at the figure in the sky. He was still calling her senior, and not goddess. Goddess Qihuan smiled and came out of the carriage, standing before it in the air, wearing a gorgeous red robe. She looked graceful and luxurious. In an instant, she transformed from an alluring woman into a noble empress, brimming with peerless elegance. In the instant that she changed her manner, many people would not even dare to look at her. Yi Futian was surprised. This change had been so quick. She truly was a cultivator of the palace of the illusory god. If that is what you wish, Emperor Yi, then so be it, she said with a smile. Her noble atmosphere spread out as her gaze fell upon Yi Futian. In an instant, her form seemed to enter into his mind. I have heard of your deeds, Emperor Yi, and I admire you greatly. I wish to become your friend, continued the goddess Qihuan, smiling. As her voice reached him, Yi Futian seemed to enter another space, a world of illusion magic. In this world, there was only him and the goddess Qihuan. Your method of making friends is rather peculiar, said Yi Futian. Goddess Qihuan stepped through the air towards Yi Futian until she was right in front of him. I don't want the common people of the outside world to disturb us, she said. Here there is only you and me. You can confide in me anything you want. How does that sound? We have only just met. Why speak of confiding things in each other? Yi Futian's face was impassive as he spoke. We may have just met, but I have heard your name for a long time. Why can't we confide in each other? Goddess Qihuan stood in front of Yi Futian, staring right into his eyes. At that moment, a powerful will entered into Yi Futian's mind. Suddenly, many images flashed through his mind, and many of them were images of this woman. Yi Futian was suddenly incredibly wary. He let loose a burst of a powerful will that cut through everything. It sliced right through the images of gods Qihuan in his mind. Boom! Everyone outside only saw Yi Futian take a few steps backward, after which he steadied himself and looked up into the air. Goddess Qihuan was still standing there calmly, looking extremely noble. She grinned down at him and said, I never thought you would be someone prone to infatuation, Emperor Yi. What power is this? Yi Futian's heart trembled. He narrowed his eyes as he gazed at the figure in the air. This goddess Qihuan was able to invade his willpower and spy into his emotional world. He had never run into power like this before. If you do not mind, I would truly like to become friends with you, Emperor Yi, continued goddess Qihuan. I do mind, said Yi Futian coldly. He swept his gaze over her as she stood there in the sky and said, Since this is only the first time you have offended me, I will not pursue justice in this matter. If there is a next time, the consequences will be on your own head. Huh! Surprised looks came over everyone's faces. The situation had changed so quickly. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yi Futian had just threatened goddess Qihuan, a cultivator of the 9th tier. This was unspeakably arrogant. Yi Futian had just threatened goddess Qihuan, a cultivator of the 9th tier. This was unspeakably arrogant. But considering his past victories, he had fought his way through the ancient royal family of Duan single-handedly, sweeping away all of their renhuangs. He had defeated 9th tier renhuangs before, and that had not even been the first time he had done so. Moreover, as long as their great path was not perfected, perhaps Yi Futian really would not be too worried about them. But goddess Qihuan was no ordinary person. She could not be compared to ordinary 9th tier renhuangs. Her cultivation techniques were mysterious and unique, and she could excite any of her opponent's desires. It seemed that she had done something to Yi Futian before that had prompted this reaction from him. However, everyone knew that goddess Qihuan must not have used her full power. She was testing him. If she had really acted against Yi Futian, things would not have ended so simply. Goddess Qihuan was stunned when she heard Yi Futian's words. She stared at him with her beautiful eyes and saw the white-haired young man staring back at her, cold will filling his deep eyes. Clearly, her invasion of his mind had angered him. You are not even the least bit concerned with saving face, are you, Lord Yi? She said, looking down at him. At that moment, noble will suffused her. I am curious, are you really able to be so rude to Emperor Yi? There was a bit of coldness in her tone, as she stared at Yi Futian once more with her charming eyes. Boom! In that instant, divine light wrapped around Yi Futian, and a terrible demonic air flow swept out through the sky. The image of a divine peacock appeared, shining its brilliant light through all the heavens as well as towards goddess Qihuan. At the same time, Yi Futian's eyes became both strange and terrible, as his gaze seemed to pierce the goddess. "Just try me," said Yi Futian. As they felt the violent airflow coming from him, everyone also felt a suffocating pressure. For a time, the vast area around them was silent. No one had thought Yi Futian would do this. At that moment, Yi Futian, who had been ignited by anger, was like the descendant of a demon god. He was completely different from how he had been before. He floated in the air, silver hair dancing behind him like silver blades. It was an overwhelming sight. Perhaps this was the real Yi Futian. This proud son of heaven, who had come from the Donghua domain, had made his name in Four Corner Village, and had swept through the ancient royal family of Duan, was now showing his true glory. Goddess Qihuan stared at Yi Futian. Try him? She was naturally not afraid of Yi Futian, but the way he was acting right now put a little bit of pressure on her. Suddenly she smiled, and it was like 100 flowers coming into bloom, both delicate and beautiful. It made all the cultivators who were watching become stunned. She had transformed from a noble empress into a charming beauty in an instant. Both of these attitudes were present within her, which made her even more alluring. It was like her image had been imprinted on everyone's mind. No wonder you are the most famous genius in the Shangqing domain. Your charm and mannerisms are impressive, Emperor Yi. There are many heroes in the Shangqing domain, and yet I do not know how many of them can compete with you, said Goddess Qihuan. As she smiled, the tense atmosphere seemed to disappear instantly. Everything was light and breezy. Yi Futian still did not retract his aura, but at that moment, everyone relaxed a little bit. Yi Futian could see that the goddess Qihuan had no intention of attacking him. He ignored her words and recalled his aura, becoming a completely different person in an instant. Off in the distance, more people were coming, including the prince and princess of the Shangyu deity nation, the cultivators of the Lu clan, and more. They stood in different places, some looking at the divine casket, and others at Yi Futian. Yi Futian had clearly become a focal point for all the cultivators. Apart from the greatest figures, he was the only one who could observe the corpse within the divine casket without being instantly injured. The others, even those as powerful as Muyin Lan and Emoku, could not do this. Yi Futian ignored their gazes and continued to observe the divine body. Since this was the way things were going to be, he did not need to worry about it anymore. He would gaze at the corpse for a little longer before it was taken away. As time passed, Yi Futian continued to stare at the divine body. Moreover, he started trying to have the ancient characters enter his body. At that moment, he was standing in the sky gazing down at the divine casket. A halo of light was around him, and it seemed like ancient characters were carved into his body. What was most frightening was that the characters that were rushing into his eyes were having a wild effect on the world within him. Within his life palace was the spatial world that the world tree had forged. The sun and the moon hung high in the sky, and the stars revolved. But once those characters rushed in, they swept through wildly, destroying everything. Even the stars collapsed as thunder and lightning smashed everything to dust. The characters that had charged and tried to destroy everything, they even attacked the world tree itself. This was the first time Yi Futian had been in this situation. Previously, even when he had encountered a divine item, the world tree had still stood firm as the absolute master, and had even swallowed and absorbed their power, just like it had with the heart of the demon peacock god. But this time, the corpse of Xinjia, the great emperor within the divine casket, was giving off endless characters that were all rushing through all his spirits and attacking everything. A great, stormy wave rose within his world tree life palace. Boom! Yi Futian began trembling incessantly. After a moment he groaned, and his body was sent flying backward. He spat up a mouthful of blood. His face had gone deathly white. But as he landed on the ground, he sat up and crossed his legs. A porcelain bottle appeared in his hand. He crushed it and took out a pill from within, swallowing it. Powerful life will suffused his body. But even so, his trembling body was still giving off great booming noises. Everyone was staring at him, watching more and more blood pour out of his mouth. His face was so pale it seemed as if he was suffering from great pain. I was too impulsive, he said to himself. He had done this a little too sloppily. He thought he could adapt himself to this power. But obviously, he was nowhere near good enough. Xiaqing Yuan strode towards him, a worried look on her face. The cultivators of Four Corner Village were concerned as well. This man seemed to have bitten off more than he could chew this time. Is he gravely injured? All the cultivators around were watching Futian. This was the first time they had seen him get hurt, while looking at the divine casket. Previously he had had no problems. The power of the characters coming out of the divine casket was truly frightening to behold. Futian kept spitting out mouthfuls of blood. His aura had grown much weaker. Many people, though he had been wounded to the very core, that his great path had suffered injury. It would truly be a shame if one of the world's top figures fell just from observing the divine body. However, after a while, Futian's aura began to gradually revive. Divine trees surrounded him, as his body became a tree of life. He began to recover swiftly. Everyone could clearly sense that Futian's weak aura was beginning to strengthen. What a marvelous recovery! Everyone thought to themselves as they watched him. His rejuvenation was so swift that they were all shocked. Previously, they had clearly felt how grievous the injury that Futian had received was. He had possibly even been injured in the very root of his great path. However, he had still been able to start healing so quickly. This is the great path of life. To have such a robust life aura is something that even peak-level Renhuangs would not necessarily be able to obtain, said an upper-level Renhuang, as he spoke with those around him. Many people nodded in agreement. They had also noticed how vigorous Futian's life aura was. Before long, Futian had healed enough where he was as good as new. He had returned to peak fitness. At that moment, Blind Tai and Feng Huan came over to his side and whispered, "How do you feel?" "I feel fine," Futian answered. "Be a little more careful. Don't put yourself in danger in your rush for success," Blind Tai reminded him. "I will take care," said Futian with a nod. "Do you still want to keep going?" said Xiaqing Yuan from behind them. Her tone was cold. Futian looked over at her and saw that her beautiful eyes held him in an icy, tight gaze. "Don't worry about it, I will be careful," said Futian with a smile at Xiaqing Yuan. However, she did not seem satisfied with his response. She kept glaring at him. Futian rose and stretched out, looking very casual. However, when his eyes fell upon the divine casket, a sharp look appeared in them. He turned to Xiaqing Yuan again and said, "Does it look like I'm having trouble? This divine casket cannot injure me to my core." "So what happened before was not an injury," said Xiaqing Yuan. "Compared to the risks I take when cultivating, something like this which I am in complete control of is nothing," Futian said to her telepathically. "Don't worry, I know my limits. Moreover, I have already begun to understand something from it. It will probably help me with my cultivation, and might even help me observe the abilities of the ancient gods." When she heard his telepathic message, Xiaqing Yuan looked at him. He seemed to be completely unconcerned. She knew that she would not be able to convince him. Once he had made up his mind, she had no way of changing it. She could only say, "Don't put yourself into too much danger." "I won't," said Futian with a nod and a smile. Then he looked at the divine casket once again. His gaze became fixed upon it. Although he had received a terrible wound before, he did not shrink back from it in the least. If he could really take this power into himself and comprehend it, it would perhaps be very helpful for his cultivation. Thinking of this, Futian once again stepped forward. This made everyone look at him. Was he going to try again? This man was truly not afraid that he would not be able to withstand it. While they were still considering this, Futian had once again come up to the divine casket. "If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." A very strange phenomenon happened outside of the domain chief's manor. A very strange phenomenon happened outside of the domain chief's manor. Divine light glittered within a certain space, which held a set of sacred remains. Despite so many supreme people throughout the Shangqing domain coming to that place, only Yi Futian alone was able to gain access to the sacred remains and train with them. Yi Futian went into that space on the second day, intending to train near that divine casket. He had sustained many injuries, yet he seemed like some undying immortal, capable of recovering very quickly every time he sustained injuries. The whole process had been repeated so many times over that the cultivators present were all in awe at just how tenacious he was. Yet, he was forbidden from going inside the place holding the casket by the guards from the domain chief's manor. The chief himself had given orders forbidding anyone from looking at the divine casket, but they allowed those supreme cultivators to do so anyway. However, the place at which the divine casket was held was barred from entrance. Emperor Yi, please train outside, one of the Renhuang guards said to Yi Futian. Despite forbidding Yi Futian from getting inside, he was nonetheless being very polite. His powers had been seen by all cultivators present, after all, and they all deemed that someone with such powers would definitely be able to achieve great things. He could possibly even stand at the very top of the Shangqing domain, if he were to be able to stay alive. Yi Futian looked at the person who got in his way, and a faint pressure actually emanated from those deep eyes of his. At that moment, yet another person walked up to his side, saying to the Renhuang guard, "I want to take a look inside as well. Let us pass." The Renhuang guard took a look at the one coming up to Yi Futian's side and nodded. "Yes, my lady." The one who asked for the guard to make way was none other than Princess Lingxi. Despite the rules laid down before, her status was superior. As such, no one dared to object when she was the one giving Yi Futian passage. Furthermore, she wanted to get inside herself as well. "Thank you, Princess Lingxi." Yi Futian nodded at Zhou Lingxi. "I've seen what you're capable of, Sir Yi. I'm curious if you'll be able to actually learn something using the divine casket. I'll be watching you from afar, and I assume that I won't be getting in your way," Zhou Lingxi said. "Of course it wouldn't," Yi Futian replied. There was nothing else he could say. She was the one who let him inside, so it was ridiculous for him to tell her to stay outside instead. "I look forward to it." Zhou Lingxi flashed a smile, which stunned him for quite a bit. That brimming smile of hers felt rather surreal to him. Zhou Lingxi, who was a female Renhuang, actually had a tinge of pure beauty about her. The tone with which she talked to him made him feel like he had traveled through time, triggering some emotional fluctuations inside him. "What is it?" Zhou Lingxi saw Yi Futian staring at her and asked, feeling rather surprised. "It's nothing." Yi Futian snapped back to reality and smiled. "After you, princess." "Sure." Zhou Lingxi nodded as both of them walked into that space. Countless eyes were looking at them. Both of them walked to the space between the stone beams, and then walked up the stairs to reach the divine casket. Some people murmured under their breaths, after seeing how the two of them looked like a match made in heaven. Emperor Yi and Princess Lingxi sure looked like a good fit for each other. Quite a number of them nodded. There was no need to say more about her status as the princess, and her powers were superb as well. Yi Futian was extremely dashing with his white garb and silver hair. His talents were so extraordinary that hardly anyone throughout the Shangqing domain could be compared to him. If such an extraordinary figure were to be able to pair up with the princess, it would have been quite a story to tell, just like how it had been with Muyan Lan and Nanhai Qinxue back then. A good number of people talked after hearing what was said. The two of them really did look like a good match for each other. However, there were also some displeased by what they heard. A bunch of mortals who know next to nothing. Condor Sama looked at the expression of some people by its side and mumbled, "Arichi, way I see it, there is only one princess fitting enough to be by his side." The look of some princess by his side softened somewhat. The bird took note of that, and thought that its days would probably be easier. Yi Futian and Zhou Lingxi walked up the steps, and arrived not far away from the divine casket. Divine light emanated from the stone pillars around it. There was no path in this world, Zhou Lingxi murmured in a subdued tone. Her body was subjected to terrifying pressure, causing her aura inside to fluctuate. She then commented, I wonder what level Emperor Xinjiao was at all those years ago, daring to utter such words. I assume that you've heard of rumors regarding the collapse of the heavenly path. Yi Futian then said to Zhou Lingxi. I do. She nodded. I heard that there were some extremely powerful people that emerged in ancient times, and that the heavenly path balked under the power they commanded. Perhaps those people had been fighting the heavenly path the whole time, Yi Futian muttered. Zhou Lingxi looked at him and nodded, then adding, it is often said that there is no end to one's cultivation. Yet, when one reaches the most powerful of levels, one will naturally need to break the shackles and start all over. Perhaps these supreme overlords in ancient times were daring enough to fight the heavenly path. This space will really be able to wreak the will of the great path on me. Right. Yi Futian then said, please stay here, princess. If you were to proceed any further, you'd probably be in danger. All right, I shall stay here and watch while you look at the sacred remains to further your learning. Zhou Lingxi nodded and smiled. The people outside were watching the whole time while they chatted. It looked like Zhou Lingxi indeed had intentions of getting close to Yi Futian. Given her status, she had no need to go so far otherwise. A superb genius like no other would catch the attention of even the daughter of the domain chief manor indeed. Yi Futian walked up to the divine casket. That time, he was walking up to the casket from that space within. His sight was on the sacred remains within. At that moment, the feeling was far more intense than looking at the sacred remains from outside. Countless runes rushed into his eyes right away, and then surged into his life palace. The world of his life palace, as well as his body, were totally different at that moment. His blood seemed to be of golden color, which emanated an incredibly dazzling divine glow. This made him look like an overlord of all the humans, and he truly was a cut above the rest. Dazzling divine light shrouded his body, making him look like a young great emperor. The world of his life palace was even more terrifying. Sacred light dazzled everywhere, enveloping the entire place. The world tree had turned into a divine tree, shooting up to the heavens. Its branches spread far and wide, connecting the world. The swaying branches and leaves emanated a divine glow, which was extremely dazzling. It seemed it might be readying itself for the attack that was to come. As expected, as the boundless runes surged into his life palace, they invaded the whole place like towering waves, crushing everything in their path. Boom! Frightening rumbles seemed to be heard from within his body, so much so that even Zhou Lingxi, who was standing not far away, trembled deep down. Finding the commotion a little frightening, she wondered just what Yi Futian was doing that allowed him to resist the invasion from the sacred remains. Furthermore, she was curious as to what Yi Futian was trying to achieve. He looked as if he was completely drowned within a short period of time. Zhou Lingxi's mind was thoroughly shaken as she stood by the side. She felt as if she was experiencing the rumbles herself as well. She wondered what he was trying to learn through those sacred remains. Yi Futian was sent reeling back before long again, sustaining injuries just like before. However, he was hardly fazed, and that look in his eyes looked just as steeled as ever. He simply went to the side and sat down with his legs crossed, meditating to recover and looking at ease. It was as if he had gotten very used to all that had just happened. Zhou Lingxi thought, as she was looking at his incredibly handsome looks, that other than talent, he had been able to come so far due to factors that had to do with his temperament. There was an air of seriousness about him when he trained, which she had never seen. He remained completely unfazed despite all the injuries he sustained. Those outside were still only able to watch, unable to do anything. Yi Futian remained training inside several days since then, and Zhou Lingxi was present the whole time. Whenever Titans came to visit, they came up close and looked inside. Their sight would often linger on Yi Futian. Despite the presence of said Titans, Yi Futian looked completely at ease. He was devoted to his own training, and ignored anything else completely, entering a trance. Yi Futian was still training that day. He stood before the divine casket, clad with divine light, looking like a heavenly god. Dazzling divine light emanated all over him, and the rumbling in his body sounded like towering waves. At present, what he saw in his own world seemed to no longer be just runes but a true god. The sacred remains within the casket of great Emperor Xinjia seemed to have been resurrected, standing before him. All those boundless runes seemed to have become a part of him. His body became like a world of its own. And those runes looked like all the rules governing that world. Futian seemed to want to take a closer look. He seemed to be able to see great Emperor Xinjia appearing right before him. And the emperor looked like a true god just by standing around. Boom! Futian was sent flying yet again. And it was more serious that time. He was blasted off of the steps right away, crashing into a stone pillar far away. He coughed up blood and sustained massive injuries. Those outside gasped at the scene. Sir Yi. Zhou Lingxi turned around and made her way down the steps. Futian then supported himself with his hand on the pillar as he sat up, leaning on the pillar. He shook his head, then smiled and said, "I'm fine." He then closed his eyes to train after that. Zhou Lingxi felt rather moved upon seeing all that. Despite being such a supreme being, he was still putting his life on the line just to further his training, ignoring the cost to himself. The cultivators outside were thoroughly impressed. Every single supreme genius, while indeed possessing superb talent, was just as hardworking. At that moment, divine light dazzled from within the domain chief's manor. A group of people came, and titans from all corners appeared one by one. The chief came out to greet them personally as he scanned the crowd. "News from the imperial palace then?" someone asked. "Indeed." The chief nodded and continued. "It is the will of the great emperor that the divine casket of great Emperor Xinjia shall be taken care of by the Shangqing domain. Given that it was found in Shangqing domain itself, the imperial palace will not interfere. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 2171. Constructing the Divine Mausoleum. Chapter 2171. Constructing the Divine Mausoleum. The man speaking was watched by all who were present, and all of them felt something right there and then. The palace's decision to not take away the divine casket and leave it for those at the Shangqing domain, where the divine casket was discovered, to deal with it spoke volume of its magnanimity. They thought that only the likes of the imperial palace would be able to be so magnanimous. They had actually refrained from claiming the body of an ancient god. The imperial palace would only need to say the word for the divine casket to be delivered to them otherwise. Yet those from the imperial palace actually told them to take care of the casket as they saw fit. But then again, none from the domain itself would have dared to fight the domain chief's manor for the right to the casket. As such, the divine casket would probably be left at the domain chief's manor for good, serving as a sacred relic of the place. But then again, while that was the common thought among those present, with the titans from the cultivation forces arriving, it was probably not all that easy for the domain chief's manor to claim the casket as its own. At that moment, the place appeared unusually silent. The supreme titans were all present. None of them spoke, and they just looked at the chief who just emerged from his residence. The atmosphere of the place seemed to appear rather weird. It would seem that all of them were waiting for someone else to speak first. "The great emperor is generous enough to leave the divine casket for us, the cultivators of Shangqing domain," someone said. Someone had finally spoken after the silence persisted for some time. The man who was speaking was none other than the leader of the Nanhai clan. He looked at the chief and continued. "We of the Nanhai clan were the ones who discovered the divine casket. It was then brought here by the chief to report to the imperial palace. Now that word from the imperial palace has arrived, how would you intend to deal with this divine casket then?" The divine casket was so out of their world that none of them, despite their powers, were able to learn from it. Yet, they nonetheless knew of the value of the sacred remains which the casket held. That was the body of great Emperor Xinjia, and it had devolved into boundless runes to the point that the body couldn't be observed. Even they, the pinnacle cultivators that reigned supreme over Shangqing domain, would suffer backlash just by taking one look at the body. They also knew repeated looks would even cause serious injuries. They were thinking if they were able to take it home for further study. Of course, they were definitely not the only ones harboring such thoughts. None of those from the top-notch cultivation forces wouldn't have wanted the divine casket for themselves, so as to peer into the secrets harbored by the sacred remains. If they were to be able to get more powerful in the future, they might actually be able to learn what the imperial realm was like. Whoever was holding the casket at the moment, the others wouldn't just back away from claiming it, even if said holder was the domain chief's manor. Domain Chief Zhou looked at the crowd, and despite hearing the question clearly, he didn't rush to give an answer. Although he was the one with the most authority in all of the Shangqing domain, he was still unable to so casually order people from top-notch cultivation forces around, because those people were not actually his subordinates. They were cultivators of the divine prefecture like everyone else, and while they would do him favors and give him face, they were not about to comply with his every command. It was especially so when one such divine relic was concerned. He naturally knew that if the domain chief's manor were to claim such a relic as their own just like that, he would have invoked the wrath of everyone present. The forces would be displeased with either the domain chief's manor or with him, so much so that some might actually get into an altercation. As such, he needed to be cautious with the matter. The divine casket of Great Emperor Xinjia was discovered in the Songyuan continent by chance. As such, it could be considered as something that belongs to nobody. While many discovered it before, nobody was able to take it away. That is, until all of you came. Then, you all brought the casket here to report to the Imperial Palace. However, given that the Imperial Palace's reply was for us of the Shangqing domain to take care of it on our own, it was apparent that the Great Emperor was wise and wished to see the divine prefecture be strong. Giving us the divine casket to the Shangqing domain was an act to see that we could learn by using it. The chief elaborated. In that case, we shall not let the Great Emperor down. Everyone was still listening silently, and some were already frowning. The leader of the Nanhai clan was able to more or tell what the chief meant, and he knew that the chief would probably still intend to keep the divine casket around. As expected, the chief then continued, I shall build a divine mausoleum near the domain chief's manor, in which the divine casket of Great Emperor Xinjia shall be placed. Guards would be assigned to the mausoleum, and all top-notch figures from the continent shall be permitted to enter the place. Any from the Shangqing domain who are sufficiently powerful will be permitted entry as well, so as to ensure that the cultivators of the Shangqing domain are able to learn by observing the sacred remains of Great Emperor Xinjia for generations to come. What do you all think of this? Everyone knew what the chief meant by what he said. Constructing the divine mausoleum by the side of the domain chief's manor, and placing the divine casket inside, was but a ploy for the domain chief's manor to keep the casket under their control. They could research and learn from the divine casket at all times. Yet it was ridiculous for those of the top-notch forces to stay back at the Shangqing domain all the time. The divine casket was anything but ordinary, which meant that studying from it was anything but easy. As soon as the divine mausoleum was finished, the divine casket would be put completely under the domain chief's manor's control. However, the way the chief put it was so perfect that they couldn't come up with any reason to object, as it would be more ridiculous to think that the divine casket could be placed on their respective continents instead. Furthermore, the ground they stood on at that very moment was right outside the domain chief's manor. The leader of the Nanhai clan said that they were the ones who discovered the divine casket, but what the chief said had practically denied such claims. The divine casket was dug out by chance, to begin with, and the ones who discovered it earliest were not even qualified to get inside. If anyone were to be said to be the earliest to observe the divine casket, it would be Muyan Lan and Yi Futian. Yet, it was not to say that the casket would belong to any who laid eyes on it first. The divine casket belonged to none, and any would be able to fight to claim it. However, given that no one fought over it, and it had been brought to the domain chief's manor instead, it was only natural that the chief got to call the shots. Silence blanketed the place yet again. No one said anything, and they all seemed to be thinking. Despite feeling displeased deep down, no one stood out to object to it. Anyone who dared to object first would have gotten on the bad side of the chief, after all. Furthermore, such objection would be futile all the same. Moreover, The chief didn't say that the divine mausoleum would be constructed within the domain chief's manor's grounds, and the place would be built elsewhere instead. That meant that he had indeed taken into consideration the thoughts of others. He would have simply built the place inside the domain chief's manor, and then claimed the casket as their own otherwise. But then again, as far as practical application was concerned, the divine casket was still practically theirs. If the divine mausoleum is to be built, is it to say that my juniors would be allowed to train inside at any time we wish? The leader of the Nanhai clan asked. That is a given, the chief replied. All from the top-notch cultivation forces of the upper 9 heavens, including those from Four Corner Village, would be permitted to freely enter the divine mausoleum at all times. Everyone nodded, seemingly having accepted the proposal. In terms of raw power in the Shangqing domain, those of the domain chief's manor would probably still be the most powerful. Even those supreme beings would hardly be able to match Zhou Muhuang, the young master, let alone the chief himself. Furthermore, the cultivation forces also deemed it imperative to not offend the domain chief's manor unless absolutely necessary. Even if there were to be anyone who didn't agree to it, it eventually still wouldn't have changed anything. There was literally nowhere else the divine casket could be placed after all. Well then, given that the chief has given his word, we will naturally not object to the proposal, the leader of the Nanhai clan said, giving face to the chief. He agreed to the proposal right away. I'm fine with it as well. The leader of the Lu clan seconded the decision. With 2 of the greatest clan leaders having agreed to it, it would be pointless for the others not to be all right with it. Everyone else then agreed to the proposal of having the divine mausoleum built near the domain chief's manor, placing the divine casket within. Well then, that settles the matter. I shall order for the construction of the divine mausoleum and place the divine casket within. When the construction of the divine mausoleum is completed, we shall gather around and discuss some other matters. The actual purpose of bringing you all together was actually to discuss something else. But the case with the divine casket has taken precedence instead, the chief said, and everyone nodded. The purpose of them being there was not initially due to the divine casket. The appearance of the divine casket was but an accident. At that moment Yi Futian, who was recovering by the side, opened his eyes and looked at the chief. With the divine casket not being taken away by the imperial palace, he would be able to rest easy, as that meant that he could have more time to learn from the sacred remains. Those of Four Corner Village were allowed to enter the divine mausoleum any time after all. There would be no need for you to rush then, Sir Yi. You will have plenty of time to learn from here on out. Zhou Lingxi smiled at Yi Futian as she spoke to him. She saw that Yi Futian had seemed to be racing against time, sustaining injury after injury. Yet he still insisted on learning. However, there was no longer a need to do so. Yi Futian nodded and said, The great emperor is indeed magnanimous. Indeed. Zhou Lingxi nodded and added, Well then, in that case, let's head outside. How about I give you a tour inside the domain chief's manor, Sir Yi? Yi Futian looked at her and said, Thank you, Princess Lingxi. I'm indeed getting exhausted from training from the past several days, and a break would be nice. However, I'll be taking a rest in an inn so that I don't get in your way. Sure. Zhou Lingxi didn't say anything else. She nodded and added, When you have the time, we shall walk around in the manor again. That would be nice. Yi Futian nodded, and both of them walked outside. Zhou Lingxi bade him farewell as soon as they both emerged outside, returning to the domain chief's manor, which caused the chief to look at Yi Futian. Yi Futian went back to where his own place, and saw cold eyes looking at him. He felt rather exasperated as he rubbed his brow and said, Let's head back. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2172. Yet another gathering. Chapter 2172. Yet another gathering. Yi Futian trained alone in the inn. He had been training in isolation, right after he returned from the domain chief's manor. He was seen sitting cross-legged at the moment. Great path rumbling was heard from his body like a tsunami. The terrifying power of the great path howled within the world of his life palace, causing divine light of the great path to keep seeping out of his body. The power of the great path tempered his body over and over, growing his physical body stronger and stronger, as the will of the great path became increasingly intense. It took quite a while before he stopped training. The divine light of the great path surged all over his body, causing his body to seem to have developed into a body of the great path. His eyes were filled with the intense will of the great path when he opened them again. Boom! The light swept all over his body, and a formless fluctuation appeared, spreading everywhere around him. It caused the others from the inn to look where he was training. It was apparent that they had all sensed the will of the great path, which emanated from his body. He got up and opened the door, seeing several people standing right outside. Someone walked to his room, and it was none other than Duan Xiong. He glanced at Yi Futian, and sensed that Yi Futian's bearing seemed to have changed somewhat. He then grinned and said, "I knew that you were probably about to finish training when I sensed your aura. Your level has gotten somewhat deeper, and I'd say that you wouldn't take long to make it to level 6 of Renhuang Realm." "I've made some progress." Yi Futian nodded. Furthermore, the progress he made was not that of some kind of path, or that of the divine wheel of the great path. The progress he made was overarching, and he made a comprehensive leap forward. His understanding of the great path became more profound, and his level got even deeper, with the powers of great path which he had developed so far becoming more powerful. So was his divine wheel of the great path. I'd say that even I, at level 6 perfection of the great path, wouldn't able to win against you as you are right now. If you were to be able to make it to level 6 of Renhuang Realm, even those at level 7 perfection of the realm wouldn't be able to beat you. By then, I'm afraid that only the likes of Muyan Lan could contend. Duan Xiong felt rather impressed. He was naturally able to tell that Yi Futian was still very young, yet his combat prowess was already above that of countless supreme ones of the previous generation. If he were to make even further progress, he would possibly be able to touch the peak of combat prowess, excluding those who were deemed the Titans. Judging from his rate of progress at cultivation, he probably wouldn't need many years, so much so that he might only need a dozen to 20 years to achieve such a goal. Yi Futian might actually stand a chance at reaching the levels of the Titans before he turned 100 years old, and that would have been rather harrowing. I've managed to learn something watching the sacred remains of the great Emperor Shenjia in that casket, he added. That was the whole truth. He would come back with considerable gains every time he observed the sacred remains. Despite being repeatedly injured, every single injury was, nonetheless, a temperance of sorts to him, enabling him to grow stronger every time. He was even able to vaguely sense the deepest secrets of great Emperor Shenjia, and just how terrifying said great emperor was. Even just a single look would have brought about a surreal amount of learning. Yet, those Titans were unable to observe the sacred remains. Right. Duan Xiong nodded. I'm somewhat jealous of you. At present, I've only taken one look, and I've never been more miserable before. It would seem that I'd have no hope of learning through the sacred remains. When the divine mausoleum is completed, you could train at the Shangqing continent for a period of time, learning as you stay in the divine mausoleum often. That's what I'm thinking, Yi Futian grinned as he replied. When the divine mausoleum was completed, and the divine casket placed within, he would stay around and train for a period of time there. All that he had learned so far, other than furthering his training in the Great Path, he had also vaguely sensed something mystical, so mystical that he was still unable to place it. He deemed that he might need more time to learn from it. He looked outside and saw a good number of people gathering around. Chunyi took a look at him and said, "You're about to make a breakthrough? I'm getting such a feeling. It probably won't take long. I should be able to make a breakthrough within a year," he replied. Cultivators were very perceptive of their own progress, and he already had such a feeling about himself. 1 year was actually a conservative estimation. In actual fact, he vaguely sensed that he was mere steps away from making a breakthrough, and he had probably lacked some kind of catalyst. "You plan on training like how you did before?" A grumbling voice was heard. Yi Futian saw Xia Qingyuan looking at him, and she was feeling rather displeased. The way she looked at it, the way he trained was practically self-torture, inflicting severe damage on himself as he trained. Given his talents and powers, he would still be able to make a breakthrough without training like that. Qingyuan, you don't understand what I feel every time I look at the sacred remains. If you knew, you wouldn't have thought much of it. Yi Futian said to her. Every time I look at the sacred remains in the casket, every attack was actually a process of tempering on my path. What I've accumulated would bring about further change in me, which was why I felt that it wouldn't take me long to make my next breakthrough. Such opportunities were hard to come by, and they are now right before my eyes. How could I pass up the offer? I know that you're worried, but you know what kind of powers I'm good at. The injuries were hardly more than mere pain to me, and none of it would affect my foundations. Such injuries are utterly beneath mentioning when compared to the growth of my powers, don't you think? Yi Futian explained. Xia Qingyuan naturally was able to understand what he said. In actual fact, he was able to comprehend it all. Yet when she saw him undergo such a torturous process of temperance over and over, she felt awful for him nonetheless. While she was going through all that on her own, she was still able to sense just how intense the pain was as he was being tempered by the sacred remains. He wouldn't have ended up with severe injuries every time otherwise. Relax. Yi Futian clapped on her shoulder and added, compared to what we've been through before, this is nothing. She naturally knew how much he had been through throughout his journey. She lowered her head and nodded, but still don't push yourself too far. Don't get the kind of injuries that you won't recover from. That was the sacred remains of great Emperor Xinjia, and any lapse of judgment could have come with severe repercussions. There had been times when he had been so anxious to make progress that he had been even more severely injured than before. Thanks to his ridiculous healing powers, he was able to make it without any serious repercussions. Seems like it's getting increasingly rowdy outside. He cast his glance outside, and was able to see many people in the air, heading towards the area where the domain chief's manor was. The domain chief's manor intended to construct the divine mausoleum, to house the divine casket, which naturally caught the city's attention. That divine mausoleum would most probably become yet another important landmark of the Shangqing domain. But then again, that was only if the sacred remains of great Emperor Xinjia were still inside. He continued training in the inn for the next several days, and the commotion outside remained. Many top-notch figures in the domain chief's manor would definitely need to build the place to be extraordinarily sturdy. There were even pinnacle Runhuang figures laying down arrays in the divine mausoleum, so as to build a foundation of the great path with it. If the divine mausoleum was any less sturdy, any commotion that it could encounter in the future could probably bring the entire place down right away. However, none of that had anything to do with him. He simply shut himself into train, and cared about nothing else. That remained until one day when the divine mausoleum's construction was completed. Those from the domain chief's manor went out to inform the titans of the supreme forces, to have them head to the domain chief's manor. A supremely majestic building was erected somewhere nearby the domain chief's manor. The place was huge and looked very tall and mighty. Furthermore, it had truly been constructed in the form of a mausoleum fitting for a god. Other than that, they had indeed placed the divine casket containing the sacred remains of great Emperor Xinjia inside, thus truly making it a divine mausoleum. The order which the chief gave was considered an act of respect towards that great emperor. They had been very insolent before for interrupting the rest of the sacred remains of the great emperor, yet there was no way around it. There was just no way the physical body of an ancient god, when unearthed, would be able to rest in peace, as countless would certainly fight to get their hands on it. The very reason why such a thing never happened with that sacred remains was that Yi Futian had brought the divine casket there. Furthermore, given how difficult it was to even take a look at the remains, claiming and taking it away was anything but easy. As such, there was probably no cultivation force capable of just hauling the divine casket away from where it was. The center of the mausoleum was very tall, and it was built in the form of a spire. The divine casket was moved inside, with this spot serving as its resting place. Countless formidable ones arrived outside the divine mausoleum en masse. The news spread for several days, and many cultivators from the city showed up. Other than the completion of the divine mausoleum, that was also the day which the domain chief's manor summoned the forces from all corners. There was just no way they wouldn't have showed up. A group of people took to the air. Those people were none other than Yi Futian and those with him. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2173. News of the Void Realm. Chapter 2173. News of the Void Realm. Yi Futian and those with him landed. Before the divine mausoleum, there was an empty field where the fighters from the domain chief's manor were standing guard. There were quite a lot of cultivators from top-notch cultivation forces that had arrived before him. Let's get over there. Duan Tianxiong and Old Ma were there as well. They led their entourage over to that spot. That day was the day when the divine mausoleum was opened, as well as the day the chief would hold a meeting to discuss matters. There were people from top-notch cultivation forces coming to that area one after another. Some were chatting among themselves while others walked up to them. The leader of the Nanhai clan took a look at Duan Tianxiong and Old Ma before his gaze rested on Yi Futian. Will he not be present for the meeting today? The leader of the Nanhai clan asked Old Ma. The clan leader had been one of the three who showed up at Four Corner Village when the village experienced quite a commotion. That man the clan leader was referring to was someone of unimaginable power from the village. He was every bit on par with the three of them. As such, they retreated from the village and told their men to back off, acknowledging the existence of Four Corner Village. With that master in charge, it was near impossible for the three to take over the village. Even if they were to do so, the cost would probably be beyond what they could sustain. As such, they would naturally not take such risks. Furthermore, they sensed that that master had some special relationship with the village. If they were to act against that master back in the village, it would probably be them at a disadvantage instead. At that moment, it became apparent that the master was unwilling to show despite the fact that the chief was holding a meeting. This made the master as mysterious as anybody could imagine one to be. The master is a hermit, and he involves himself with nothing but the affairs of the village. I'm certain that the chief will understand, Old Ma replied, and the leader of the Nanhai clan chuckled. Many members from other cultivation forces showed up one after another. A huge group of people headed over at this moment, and the man taking the lead was none other than Zhou Muhuang. He was followed by his people. Zhou Lingxi was among them. She then took a look at Yi Futian and nodded at him with a smile. Yi Futian naturally returned the gesture. Xia Qingyuan's eyes darted between the two of them quite a bit. *T, the condor thought to itself. It simply turned its head away, pretending to have seen nothing. Zhou Lingxi was not the only one. Goddess Qihuan, Bai Yan, Emoku, Muyan Lan, and a few others carefully glanced at Yi Futian as well. It became apparent that while he had not been in the Shangqing domain for long, word of his deeds had spread far and wide, making him one of the topmost figures in the domain. There were few among his peers capable of being compared to him. As such, even during such events when top-notch cultivation forces gathered around, he could still attract a lot of attention. Welcome everyone. A man was seen landing on the ground. He was none other than Chief Zhou. He looked at the crowd and said, "Let's get inside the divine mausoleum for further discussion." Very well. Everyone nodded. The chief took the lead, and the titans from all other top-notch cultivation forces followed right behind him. Duan Tianxiong and Old Ma walked up as well. Other cultivators from said forces followed right behind the titans as they went inside the divine mausoleum. Zhou Lingxi slowed down and got to walk with Yi Futian's group. She came before Yi Futian before long. How has your training been the past several days? Zhou Lingxi looked at Yi Futian. She commented, "It would seem that your bearing has changed somewhat. While it's not all that obvious, it's nonetheless somewhat noticeable still. Changes have happened indeed. I've come to learn quite a bit from looking at the divine casket back then. And my understanding of the Great Path has deepened somewhat, Futian replied. That explains it. Zhou Lingxi grinned and continued. With the Divine Mausoleum finished, you could train here from here on out. I'm afraid it won't take you long to break into the next level. I hope so. Futian nodded as the group walked into the mausoleum. The Divine Mausoleum was built in such a way that it appeared magnificent. There was a passage within, and a stone door not far away. The door remained opened, and was guarded by Renhuang guards, who stood to the sides. This door has a massive array carved into it, and it is melded with the place into a single entity. So long as there are 2 guards assigned here, no one could force their way in and sneak into the mausoleum. That is, unless they are someone of our level, Chief Zhou introduced. Other than that, the entire Divine Mausoleum is one single entity, and it has a massive array in place. Even if the intruders were able to get inside, the place would be sealed up immediately after the array is activated. No one other than very powerful beings will be able to escape. The chief has really put his mind to it. Everyone nodded, but that line wasn't actually all that sincere. The location of the mausoleum meant that the place was basically under the domain chief's manor's control. Everyone else had to go there if they were to study and research the sacred remains. Passing through that passage led them to an extremely majestic palace within the mausoleum. The chief had moved the entire space of that divine casket in there. Stone pillars were erected in the air, and there was that staircase as well, which without a doubt led to the divine casket above. As such, the central area of the divine mausoleum was in the shape of a spire. On the walls around the spire, training platforms were hovering in midair, and they were all of different positions. Sitting at the very front of the platforms would allow one to see the sacred remains inside the casket, and if they were to be sent reeling behind, they would be stopped by the walls. There were countless lines on the walls which glittered with divine light. The entire divine mausoleum was like a super powerful great array in itself. The place was not actually complex, so much so that one could even say that it was actually very simple. The place was still mainly used for training, and as such, it only needed to be sufficiently safe and sturdy. There was no need to complicate the layout at all. With the divine casket there, all of you can come and train as you wish. The chief then added, "There is one other thing that I summoned you all here for, and that is to discuss the matters of warfare of the divine prefecture. Given that all of you have been training for many years, I'm sure you are all familiar with what happened hundreds of years ago. Ever since the passage leading to the Void Realm was opened, a great many forces went there for a pilgrimage. That included those from outside the Divine Prefecture, who had taken an interest in the Void Realm, and clashed with the forces from the Divine Prefecture. The war happening in the Void Realm has gotten increasingly intense in recent years, and I wonder if any of you have heard of it." Futian was rattled deep down. Ever since he came to the Divine Prefecture, all connections with the Void Realm had been severed, including those with some monsters which he used to control. Said connections were completely severed as soon as he entered the Divine Prefecture. He deemed that this had to do with both realms being of different spaces. The chief then claimed that there was a war going on in the Void Realm at present. He wondered if said war would involve the entire Void Realm. He wondered if all whom he knew from the Void Realm were doing fine. He came to worry intensely for them. Many years passed, and he had been very diligent at training, thinking that he could return when he had finally reached the pinnacle of Renhuang Realm. However, his heart sank as soon as he heard the news, and he wanted more than anything to return there at once. "We've heard some stories about it, but we don't know much," the leader of the Lu clan said. Some other forces were interested in the Void Realm, but they were not one of those people. The Dark Court has invaded the Void Realm, nullifying the treaty all those years ago. They are waging war. There were also other forces seen appearing at the same time. According to news from the Imperial Palace, there are now signs of the war spreading. Also, the Dark Court has begun to amass more troops, commanding the armies of the Dark World to make their way there. The Divine Prefecture is under a lot of stress as well, requiring support from the 18 domains. All of you are top-notch forces of the Shangqing domain. If the Imperial Palace were to call us to arms, I'd hope that all of you could cooperate and send your most formidable warriors there. What do you all think of this? The chief then continued slowly. Besides, this would be a great opportunity to test one's mettle. Not only would the forces from the 18 domains would be there, but there will also be forces outside the divine prefecture getting involved. It is a grand event that is hardly ever seen during times of peace. The Dark Court has made the Void Realm into a battlefield? The leader of the Nanhai clan asked. There are possible signs of it. The chief nodded. Sir, how is the war going in the Void Realm now? Futian couldn't help but ask, feeling rather worried. I've not been in the Void Realm, so I didn't know specifically how things are in there. If you all are fine with it, I may send my men to gather your forces. Of course, anyone who is unwilling to join will not be pressed to do so, the chief continued. Everyone nodded, and made it apparent that the chief had their support. Of course, it was entirely up to them to decide just how powerful would the fighters they send. Naturally, nobody would refuse such a request under these circumstances. Thank you, all of you, the chief then said. With the divine mausoleum completed, I'm sure all of you would like to stay around for a bit. I have yet to act as a proper host despite being the host. As such, I have thrown a banquet in the manor. How about we move there now? Everyone nodded, and took a look at the casket before heading outside. There were untold numbers of fighters gathered just outside, yet the vast majority of them would probably not be able to get inside the divine mausoleum. Countless pairs of eyes looked at those who emerged from the divine mausoleum, and the chief addressed them all. The divine mausoleum is now complete, and anyone who fulfills the requirements will be permitted to train inside. However, my advice remains the same. Do not attempt without caution. Everyone understood what he meant. There was literally nobody who didn't already know just how dangerous the sacred remains of the great Emperor Xinjiao were. After taking care of things over there, the chief and many formidable ones took to the air and made their way toward the domain chief's manor. Some formidable ones up front were chatting, while Futian's brow was locked tight. Xia Qingyuan could relate to his feeling at the moment, as she too was worried about things over there. All of their friends and families were over there, and there was no telling what would happen if the entire place became a war zone. It'll be fine. Xia Qingyuan comforted him despite worrying about the same things herself. Yeah, Futian nodded. His only wish at the moment was to get back there and check on things as soon as possible. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The banquet at the Shangqing Domain Chief's manor was ready, and the people from the cultivation forces took their seats. The banquet at the Shangqing Domain Chief's manor was ready, and the people from the cultivation forces took their seats. Futian and the others around him were present, sitting with those from the village. The table beside them sat cultivators of the ancient royal family of Duan. The chief sat at the main seat, and Zhou Muhuang sat beside him. The seats below him were taken by Zhou Lingxi and some others. All of them had superior bearings. Chatter was everywhere as soon as everyone took their seats in the banquet. The chief then raised his cup, and everyone quieted down. Everyone everywhere turned their eyes to the chief. It is not every day that we all get to gather like this. I'd like to take this chance to see the renowned ones from the cultivation forces of the Shangqing domain better. The successors of old people like Mu Huang have reached a decent level of training. There are also many renowned ones behind, and some had even made it to the high-level Renhuang realms, and were perfect at their levels, all of whom would possibly get to the very pinnacle. Right now, those of Four Corner Village have become a part of the world, and quite a number from the village are superb. They look even more powerful than any from the cultivation forces of the Shangqing domain, including those of the domain chief's manor. It would seem that since the war all those years ago, the divine prefecture would see a new era, where renowned ones emerge everywhere. The chief made his speech, and it was apparent that he had high opinions of those from Four Corner Village. In actual fact, the powers commanded by the village were indeed extremely powerful. Other than Old Ma, Fang Gai, Blind Tai, and the other elders were all cultivators whose great path levels were perfect. Their combat prowess was also extremely terrifying. Feng Huan was considered one of the later generations. While it could be said that the village had saw fractures among the generations, as all others other than those people mentioned were all incapable of cultivation, the generation after that was all capable of cultivation. As such, the place held terrifying potential, if one were to consider only those who were perfect at higher Runhuang levels. Even if the individuals from all top-notch cultivation forces throughout the Shangqing domain were to be taken into account, the number would still only more or less equal those of the village. People of such levels were few and far between throughout the Shangqing domain, and Four Corner Village couldn't be judged using usual conventions. Of course, two were exiled from the village, and were not actually cultivators from the village, and those two were the ones from the Nanhai clan, Muyan Lan and Muyan Long. From a certain standpoint, the Nanhai clan was the top-notch cultivation force that had the greatest number of cultivators at such levels, other than Four Corner Village. Those at the zenith will eventually fall, and those at rock bottom will eventually rise. The Lord of Shangyu Deity Nation said, "During the war all those years ago, countless cultivators perished and countless more died in the chaotic world. Now, with the world united as one and the wars subsided, all forces had finally and gradually regained vitality. The later generations continued to train and develop into what we are today. We will walk towards glory, riding the rising waves we are on right now." Everyone nodded. Those of the previous generation had all lived through those times. There had been untold numbers of powerful ones who had perished back then. They were actually considered fortunate to be able to survive and reign over a certain region during peacetimes. Indeed, the chief nodded. However, a chaotic world gives rise to heroes. Never forget that Dong Huang the Great rose to prominence at that age. Among the many renowned figures standing the pinnacle of the 18 domains today, many cultivators managed to shine in that era. They had all retreated to behind the scenes to teach their juniors, in order to become great figures themselves in the eras to come. Chaotic times saw the rise of the best as well. The cultivation environment of present times is far better than what it used to be, some said, feeling rather impressed. Times changed, and time had indeed changed everything considerably. The eras back then were totally different from the present. When the cultivation environment gets considerably improved, the pressure is lacking. As such, the war against the Dark Court this time would serve as an opportunity. The chief then added, "Mu Huang will be heading to the Void Realm this time. I'd like to know your thoughts. What would you do if the Imperial Palace were to call you to arms? But relax, we'd just chat in today's banquet, and I wouldn't mind any opinions put forth. The conflict of the Divine Prefecture is not something that a single force could steer. I would send all core members of the Nanhai clan. It is indeed an opportunity like none other," the leader of the Nanhai clan said. The others nodded, and at that moment, the chief looked at Yi Futian and said, "I heard some rumors saying that Emperor Yi hailed from the Donghua domain and achieved great fame in the Donghua banquet. I heard that you went to the Donghua domain from the Void Realm?" Everyone turned their eyes to Yi Futian as soon as the chief said what he said. Everyone wondered if Yi Futian really was from the Void Realm. Few actually knew about that, as they had only heard that Yi Futian was originally from Donghua domain, and he was hunted by the domain chief's manor of said domain. There was a wanted notice issued against him, and there were even people of top-notch forces in that domain attacking Four Corner City, just to do so, but they failed nonetheless. Yi Futian was stunned, as he never anticipated that the chief would ask him such a question. He took note of the eyes on him and replied, "I was indeed, but that was something that happened many years ago." "When you left the Void Realm, had forces like the Dark Court made it there?" the chief then asked. "Yeah, before I left, the Dark Court did open a passage leading to the Void Realm," Yi Futian replied. In actual fact, he was involved in the incident the whole way, and he played a great part in what actually happened. But he didn't elaborate on any of that. "I assumed that the Dark Court was only probing their way into the place when they first arrived. How were things back then?" the chief continued. 2 of the 7 kings of the Dark Court were there, and a good number of formidable people arrived. The devil generals were there as well, but there had been 2 divine generals from the Imperial Palace being there as well, he replied. The chief nodded slightly. They were probably probing only then. The entourage seemed formidable, but they had yet to send the best of their forces. Things might have changed considerably over the years. Yi Futian didn't say much, as he didn't want to talk too much about himself back in the Void Realm. It had been difficult for you to come all the way here from the Void Realm. I've heard quite a few things about you. You arrived first at the Donghua domain, then to Four Corner Village, and then to where you are now, rising to prominence along the way. Lingxi told me a lot about you, and the way I see it, your achievements in the future won't be any less than Mu Huang's, the chief continued. Many wore peculiar expressions, and the way they looked at Yi Futian changed. Many among them knew how extraordinary he was, and his future was definitely be anything but ordinary. They were not surprised that the chief was holding him in such high regard as well, but the key to their surprise was the meaning behind what the chief said. The chief mentioned both Zhou Muhuang and Zhou Lingxi when he talked to Yi Futian, and the meaning behind that was something worth looking into. You flatter me, chief. The young master is already at the pinnacle of Renhuang, and that is my goal, Yi Futian replied. He looked rather humble, yet one would wonder if that was really his only goal. That was a level that he would definitely reach. Among the many renowned ones throughout Shangqing domain, only you get to look at the sacred remains of great Emperor Xinjia in the divine casket. I heard from Lingxi that you were able to learn through it. I'd say such an appraisal would be apartment. In fact, said appraisal might have been watered down instead. The chief laughed heartily and continued. Lingxi never complimented anyone like that, and you're the first one that caught her attention. She has mentioned things about you quite a few times that rocked the minds of the formidable ones around, and the banquet became unusually quiet, as everyone had their ears perked. What is the chief trying to do here? Those behind Yi Futian looked rather complicated as well, especially Xia Qingyuan. She turned her eyes at the chief, wondering what the man meant by what he said. Yi Futian felt rather weird about it all as well, being rather puzzled as to why the chief brought such things up on an occasion like that. Zhou Lingxi was of esteemed status, and her social standing was high. She had extremely formidable powers as well, and such a person would catch massive amounts of attention. However, many wouldn't have any other thoughts, as they knew just how impossible those thoughts could be. Thank you for your compliments, princess. It might just be me being lucky that I'm able to look at the sacred remains of great Emperor Xinjia. Yi Futian replied, there is no need to be so humble. I could naturally see just how good you are myself. Lingxi hardly sees anyone that she is impressed with, and she speaks highly of your level. I agree with what she said. You two may get in touch more in the future when you have the chance. It would benefit both of you if you two could train together. The chief smiled and added. His intentions behind his words became increasingly obvious. Zhou Lingxi didn't look sheepish or shy as well. As a very esteemed female Renhuang of Shangqing domain, she appeared at ease, as she smiled as she looked at Yi Futian. Is the chief trying to make Yi Futian his son-in-law? That was the thought that came to the minds of everyone present. Muyan Lan and Nanhai Qinxue had been a couple that everyone deemed to be a match made in heaven, and the Nanhai clan gained themselves a powerful son-in-law. They wondered if the domain chief's manor was trying to pull the same trick as the Nanhai clan. Furthermore, it was apparent that not only was Yi Futian's potential not below that of Muyan Lan, but he could actually be above Muyan Lan. Many cultivators from the Nanhai clan wore complicated expressions. Zhou Muhuang had invited Yi Futian into the domain chief's manor before, and the latter refused. Yet, if Yi Futian were to be the son-in-law of the chief, he would then naturally be considered as a member of the domain chief's manor nonetheless. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yi Futian also wasn't sure about what the domain chief and Zhou Lingxi meant. Humans were impulsive by nature. The higher the cultivation level a person achieved, the more self-possessed and dispassionate he became. Most cultivators could leave emotions out and weigh the pros and cons rationally when they reached the Renhuang plane. Yi Futian also wasn't sure about what the domain chief and Zhou Lingxi meant. Humans were impulsive by nature. The higher the cultivation level a person achieved, the more self-possessed and dispassionate he became. Most cultivators could leave emotions out and weigh the pros and cons rationally when they reached the Renhuang plane. Of course, Yi Futian wouldn't assume that Zhou Lingxi had fallen in love with him during such a short time. That being said, the domain chief obviously made those remarks with Zhou Lingxi's permission. Otherwise, he wouldn't say it in front of everyone. In that case, what on earth did they mean? Could they genuinely intend to let him marry Zhou Lingxi on the strength of his remarkable potential and promising future? Did they want him to join the domain chief's manor? Nevertheless, the possibility felt too simple and didn't fit the domain chief's manor's usual style. Unless the domain chief's manor somehow figured out Yi Futian's true capacity and was eager to rope him in by any possible means. However, the domain chief's manor only dropped a hint and didn't say anything explicitly. To avoid embarrassment for both sides, Yi Futian certainly wouldn't react in a presumptuous way either. He replied with a smile. The vice chief and Princess Lingxi both have extraordinary talent. I will gladly learn from them if I have a chance in the future. The domain chief smiled and nodded without saying anything further. For a high-ranking man like him, an indirect suggestion in public was enough to show his high opinion of Yi Futian. There was no doubt that Yi Futian could join the domain chief's manor as the son-in-law, as long as he was keen on the idea himself. In that case, he would be backed by both the domain chief's manor and Four Corner Village. No one in the Shangqing domain would dare to touch him no matter what he did. Zhou Lingxi deliberately approached you in the beginning. I'm afraid that she has some ulterior motive. Xia Qingyuan talked to Yi Futian through voice transmission. Although Yi Futian couldn't help but chuckle to himself, he knew that Xia Qingyuan had a point. He carefully thought back on how Zhou Muhuang invited him over, and Zhou Lingxi made advances on him ever since he arrived at the Shangqing continent. The cultivators from the domain chief's manor seemed a little too warm-hearted and generous as well. Yi Futian knew he should be more cautious. Although the domain chief's manor hadn't shown any malicious intent yet, there was nothing wrong with staying vigilant. At the very least, Yi Futian couldn't place too much trust in the domain chief's manor. Why does the Dark Court want to attack the Void Realm? Someone asked. The Void Realm was the original realm at first, and became an abandoned land later. Nonetheless, it remains to be a special place. Perhaps the Dark Court believes that the original realm still holds a great value, the domain chief replied. Or maybe neither side wants to turn their own territory into a battlefield, so they picked the original realm. In fact, the domain chief didn't tell the whole truth. He also heard a rumor about a prophecy. The change of the world would originate in the original realm. The prophecy was known by few people, and was far from concrete. Nevertheless, as far as the domain chief knew, the prophecy was made by an authoritative figure as his prediction for the future of the world. The original realm was shattered when the heavenly path collapsed. If the change of the world really arose in the original realm again, it must be predestined by divine will. Regardless, the deserted original realm was likely to be the beginning of the new world. It also meant that a major event would probably take place, and even transform the entire world. Of course, the domain chief would never tell this to the public. After all, he had no solid proof, and no one could guarantee what would happen in the future. What he heard was nothing but an elusive prophecy. In the meantime, Yi Futian felt anger rising from within. They chose the original realm as the battlefield because they didn't want to damage their own territories? Why did people living in the original realm deserve to suffer the calamity and ruin of war? Yi Futian grew up in the original realm. His attachment to the original realm was far greater than his feelings for the divine prefecture. While everyone else was engaged in casual conversations, Yi Futian was not in the mood for small talks. He couldn't stop being worried about the situation in the original realm. As soon as he finished the current stage of cultivation, he planned to set out and return to the original realm, when the Donghuang Imperial Palace summoned everyone over. Mr. Yi, is something bothering you? Zhou Lingxi darted a look at Yi Futian from nearby, and asked with a smile. She could tell that Yi Futian was absent-minded. Yi Futian exhaled a long breath to keep his anxiety and distress under control for now. It was meaningless for him to fret about the possibilities. Instead, He should be focusing on improving his strength before he went back to the original realm. He would be able to protect himself better if he managed to advance to the Sixth Order. Otherwise, there was no point for him to go back. He might even become a burden. Many friends of mine live in the Void Realm. I'm a little worried about them, Yi Futian replied. Zhou Lingxi nodded and said, we probably will head to the Void Realm in a few days. They will be all right. Thank you, Princess Lingxi, Yi Futian answered, nodding slightly. Zhou Lingxi gave a slight smile without saying anything else. The banquet went on. The mighty figures were still chatting with each other, while the youngsters listening to the conversations intently. The guests didn't split up and leave until the banquet was over. Mr. Yi, would you like to take a walk in the domain chief's manor? Zhou Lingxi invited Yi Futian. There are many unique places in the manor that can be helpful for cultivation. The domain chief's manor was not an ordinary residence. It was as good as a scaled-down city. Thank you, Princess Lingxi. I would like to return to the Divine Mausoleum to continue my cultivation there. I've been making some progress these days and shouldn't stop halfway, Yi Futian replied. Zhou Lingxi nodded and said, all right. Still in all, the Divine Casket will remain in the Divine Mausoleum. Mr. Yi, you don't have to rush and risk injury. I understand. Yi Futian nodded and said, Princess Lingxi, please excuse me. Yes, Zhou Lingxi answered. Yi Futian turned around and walked away. Xia Qingyuan was waiting for him not too far away. She darted a glance at Zhou Lingxi when Yi Futian came over, then left with him side by side. Zhou Lingxi certainly understood the meaning of Xia Qingyuan's look. However, she still had a faint smile on her beautiful face, which made it impossible to guess what she was thinking. The cultivators from various groups left the domain chief's manor in succession. Nevertheless, many of them seemed to have the same destination. They were all heading to the Divine Mausoleum. Although the banquet was over, the Divine Casket was still in the Divine Mausoleum. These cultivators surely wouldn't miss the precious opportunity. They planned to cultivate next to the Divine Casket for a while, and would only leave for real if they failed to gain anything from it. Who would be willing to go home without trying their luck at the Divine Mausoleum first? Even the master cultivators were curious to see how special the sacred remains of Xinjia, the great emperor, truly was. More and more people arrived at the Divine Mausoleum. The cultivators from the top forces went straight into the mausoleum. Yi Futian and other cultivators from Four Corner Village and the ancient royal family of Duan, including Old Ma, also showed up. Apparently, they planned to cultivate for some days inside the Divine Mausoleum. The crowd gathered in the Divine Mausoleum. Plenty of people had settled on the training platform already. Yi Futian and the others stood in the area below and stared ahead. Only a few people were capable of entering the inner zone. Yi Futian was probably the only one outside of the mighty figures. Yi Futian moved forward into the inner zone, rather than the training platform overhead. He walked directly in the direction of the Divine Casket. Other cultivators were not surprised by Yi Futian's move. These top figures of various groups were also eager to see if Yi Futian could really comprehend something with the help of the Divine Casket. Yi Futian walked to the Divine Casket and looked right at it. In an instant, the divine light illuminated him, and ancient characters were engraved on his body. A series of deafening noise reverberated through the mausoleum and impelled the crowd to gaze at him with an astonished look. Yi Futian really could cultivate with the aid of the Divine Casket. How did he withstand the power of the sacred remains? Even the mighty figures were astounded. They stared at Yi Futian and sent out pulses of energy, attempting to gauge his power and figure out his secret cultivation method. However, they failed to sense anything from Yi Futian but a wisp of the energy of the demon god. Was this happening simply because he inherited the will of the demon god? Seeing that Yi Futian had been watching the Divine Casket continuously for a long time, the cultivators from different groups started to grow anxious and impatient. With a solemn look on their faces and intense energy of the great path surrounding their bodies, they approached the Divine Casket and looked down from the training platform. The Divine Casket was situated in the Divine Mausoleum right now. Why should they wait longer before trying their hands at it too? They might as well go back to where they came from, if they didn't have the courage to make an effort. What was the point of staying here? Before long, however, a succession of cultivators started to moan in agony. Many people were bleeding from their eyes, their faces ghastly pale. They pulled back with all possible haste. It was the first attempt for some of them, but some had tried to look at the sacred remains before. After sensing the terrifying power of the divine casket, they began to see Yi Futian in a new light. Why was he able to do it? Old Ma and the others watched everything quietly. Yi Futian was the only one in the divine mausoleum who could successfully study the sacred remains. They wondered if the attention he attracted to himself was a good thing or not. Nevertheless, Yi Futian wasn't bothered by what happened around him. He was absorbed in cultivation and paid no heed to other people's thoughts and opinions. Day after day, Yi Futian was engrossed in cultivation. He sometimes pondered in front of the divine casket, and sometimes cultivated on the training platform. The energy of the great path emanated from his body was more and more domineering. Many people suspected that Yi Futian was close to breaking through into the next level. He was using the divine casket to temper his body and work his way up to the 6th order of the Renhuang plane. Other cultivators believed that few Renhuang in the Shangqing domain could defeat Yi Futian after advancing to the 6th order. In the blink of an eye, over a month had passed since the divine mausoleum was built. In the blink of an eye, over a month had passed since the divine mausoleum was built. Some of the master cultivators were still inside the divine mausoleum. They had been cultivating there as well, and had made considerable progress. By now, they could more or less comprehend the imperial glory of Xinjia the Great Emperor during his glory days. Of course, Yi Futian undoubtedly remained to be the person who achieved the most thorough comprehension. He was sitting on the training platform at this moment, with terrifying sounds of the great path coming out of his body. Nevertheless, he was not looking at the sacred remains, as his eyes were shut tight. He glowed with the dreadful divine light of the great path, and his skin was engraved with countless runes and characters. It seemed that his entire body was engulfed in the divine light emitted by the runes and characters. Over the past few days, the cultivators inside the divine mausoleum had been watching Yi Futian transforming himself little by little. As he achieved more and deeper comprehension through studying the sacred remains, the changes in his body became more apparent as well. Everyone was aware that Yi Futian was on the edge of a major breakthrough. That being said, other cultivators didn't know that the scenes in Yi Futian's life palace were even more gruesome. At this point, Yi Futian had entered a mysterious world where his consciousness had materialized. A man of great height and powerful build towered over him. It was Xinjia the Great Emperor, who seemed to be raised from the dead, now standing in front of him. They confronted each other face to face. Yi Futian felt like he was facing not a human cultivator, but a god in his path. He found laws and orders of the path of Xinjia the Great Emperor. To put it more accurately, he had identified him as Xinjia the Great Emperor himself. He was Xinjia the Great Emperor, the man who challenged the heavenly path and proclaimed that there had been no path in the world until he came forth. Bang! Yi Futian's body almost turned into a melting pot for the great path. Various types of energy of the great path emanated from his body as the deafening noise inside him blasted continuously and relentlessly. All the cultivators in the divine mausoleum could feel the fierce power of the great path rushing out of Yi Futian. Many people couldn't help but turn around to look in Yi Futian's direction, including some in the middle of a cultivation session. They all sensed the formidable force coming out of Yi Futian's body. Yi Futian studied the sacred remains in the divine casket, and cultivating the great path with its help. Was he going to advance to the next level, finally? This possibility disheartened most of the genius cultivators from top forces. They hadn't achieved anything while Yi Futian was ready to move up to a higher cultivation level already. Yi Futian easily put everyone else in the shade when it came to cultivating with the help of the sacred remains in the divine casket. However, instead of trying for the higher level, Yi Futian was actually caught in a remarkable state of mind at this moment. He had abundant experience with obtaining several distinctly different skills through cultivation and comprehension. The most frequently used cultivation method in the later stage was the deed of thorough comprehension. The deed of thorough comprehension could be cultivated in both the standard and the reverse order. Back in the days, the Sky River Great Elder cultivated the deed of thorough comprehension in reverse order. Although he achieved a major breakthrough and reached the level of fake emperors, he was also demonized by the process. To cultivate the deed of thorough comprehension in the standard order meant to absorb the power of everything in the world into one's body, to build up and strengthen oneself. On the contrary, the Sky River Great Elder cultivated the deed of thorough comprehension in reverse order and surrendered his own path to the world. He offered himself up as a sacrifice and never achieved true spiritual transcendence. Despite that, either way of cultivating the deed of thorough comprehension was beneath Xinjia the Great Emperor, and was never on an equal footing with his own cultivation method. Xinjia the Great Emperor only cultivated himself. He rose above the path and established the world by himself. His own body was his path. Not a single person after him ever had the same level of vision and boldness. Yi Futian could almost perceive the ego and pride of Xinjia the Great Emperor from his remains. He became aware of his cultivation method and his ambition to reign over the path. Perhaps this was where the ultimate cultivation led to? Did all the great emperors pursue the same goal? Yi Futian had no way of knowing. At least now, he could make out the cultivation path of Xinjia the Great Emperor. Moreover, the feeling became stronger and stronger, and subconsciously, he followed the same path. As he continued to cultivate in such a way, Yi Futian entered a marvelous state where he was mesmerized by Xinjia the Great Emperor and his cultivation path. The forceful great path kept tempering his body, and the deafening noise attracted more attention. Everyone was wondering what was coming Yi Futian's way. Not only did the spectators not know, but Yi Futian also couldn't tell. Cultivating through comprehension was a magical experience. Sometimes the cultivator would get lost in a hypnotized state. Right now, Yi Futian was sent into such a trance where he completely relaxed. His consciousness floated in an illusory world. He saw himself everywhere. It was as though the entire world was filled with his consciousness. The divine light of the great path kept radiating from his body. Yi Futian started to let this burst of power run free. Yi Futian even forgot about time and couldn't extricate himself from cultivation. His body. The onlookers around noticed the astonishing changes in Yi Futian's body. They stared at Yi Futian and sensed the extremely powerful energy of the great path emerging from him. Could it be that he really used the sacred remains in the divine casket to comprehend the great path, and even tempered his own body with it? Some mighty figures were intently watching Yi Futian's cultivation process as well. Maybe he picked the right way, a voice rang out. It was the clan leader of the Nanhai family speaking to Muyan Lan, Nanhai Qinxue, and other people behind him. The clan leader also comprehended a little from studying the sacred remains, but he hadn't applied it to cultivation yet. He realized that Yi Futian had taken one step further than all the master cultivators, himself included. He suspected that Yi Futian might have selected the correct cultivation path, and was elevating himself with the help of his comprehension. As time went on, everyone felt that Yi Futian was making progress and growing stronger every second. But no one knew for sure how powerful he became. Yi Futian's efforts even made the stone wall behind him vibrate violently. The loud booms echoed through the divine mausoleum. Surprisingly, he floated forward and descended from the training platform. Everyone's gaze was fixed on Yi Futian, who was approaching the divine casket from above. Yi Futian's eyes were still closed shut, staying afloat right above the divine casket. In between the stone pillars, he came face to face with the sacred remains. Bang! The crowd was dazzled by the terrifying divine light and heard the deafening noise coming out of Yi Futian's body. They even sensed that the energy was flowing out of the divine casket as well. All the mighty figures gaped at the divine casket at this moment. They saw that Xinjia the Great Emperor's body was moving inside the casket. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.